Hello again. It's time now to look through the morning's papers. With me to do that, the broadcasters and journalists Bidisha Mamata and Thomas Copeland. There they are. Good morning to you both. Hey Bidisha, hey Thomas. Thomas, are you in New York? Are things that bad you had to leave the country?
Yeah, well, I thought, what else would I do at about 1:45 in the morning in New York? Sure, it's a city that famously does sleep apart from me, and I'm here to talk to you about what's on the front page of the British newspaper.
Well, we're honoured. Thank you for staying awake. Talk us through the Express, will you, Thomas?
That's right, yeah. Having U-turned on just about every policy that's in her leadership platform, and then installing one of her opponent's biggest backers. Jeremy Hunt was a huge backer, a big backer, a prominent backer of Rishi Sunak in the leadership election. It's fairly clear, Liz Truss has handed the reins of power to Jeremy Hunt as things stand. She cannot afford to lose him. He's a political player, and he will know that. And that means that she's in office, but she's certainly not in power. Quite a few of the papers today are talking about plots to out-trust. There's chat of Ben Wallace. We'll talk about that more in a second. Rishi Sunak as unity candidates. The problem for the Conservatives at the moment is just deposing another leader so shortly after installing Liz Truss into position, applying the guillotine to Boris Johnson, and then before that installing Boris Johnson in such a dramatic fashion. The party starts to lose legitimacy. It starts to look like it doesn't have the integrity to move between all of these leaders throughout this period of time. And a new Prime Minister that was installed at this stage, it would be unlikely, I think, in the eyes of the public to have a popular mandate that could see it through to the next general election in 2024. What does that mean? Well, it means a general election. A lot in the party are saying, well, are we better to have a general election now rather than in 2 years' time? It almost feels like, and there's a palpable sense in which, there's a fait accompli. The Conservatives now increasingly feeling that they won't be in office come the next general election. Labour increasingly looking like it will be the party of the next government. And that means the Conservatives are looking perhaps at their own seats and saying, well, what's best in this instance? It might be the case, actually, and I'm probably of the opinion that paralysis might be the option that's decided in the short term. Politics is so fast, it can change so quickly. Look at how quickly this nightmare materialised for Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. It was really in the matter of weeks, maybe even days, that it materialised, and the polls started to plummet in the way they did. I think it's probably likely that Tory MPs will say to themselves, installing a new PM would look so bad, we'll cling on to Liz Truss. We'll have Jeremy Hunt in there, who will clearly be, in charge. Liz Truss cannot afford to lose him, and he will know that. He will effectively be running the economic policy for the government, and Tory MPs will have to sit there and try to wait and see if their position improves sometime over the next 2 years.
Bidisha, I see you nodding along. I mean, what do you think? What's your opinion and your take of where we find ourselves this Sunday morning?
I'd agree with everything we just heard. I think the party policy of playing dead or coasting or just keeping on. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it is broke, also don't fix it. Might be a good policy because of the sheer spaghetti soup mess that Thomas is alluding to. We're coming out of 3 years of incredible turmoil at all levels of society and politics and economics, and there's tremendous voter fatigue. Yet at the same time, I did want to add something about Keir Starmer, who, for someone who coulda, shoulda, woulda, maybe be Prime Minister in an upcoming election, has been extraordinarily quiet. So a sense of muffled fatalism has infected both of the major parties.
Why do you think he's been quiet, Thomas? I saw you nodding.
Well, I agree. I think probably Keir Starmer saying to himself, well, why should I interfere when my opponents are making a kind of mess of their own making? I mean, what's really important then is what's reflected actually additionally in the front page of this Sunday Telegraph this morning is that this is very much a problem, and a political problem, and an economic problem.
Should we bring up hang on a second, Thomas. Let's bring up the Telegraph. It's got Jeremy Hunt. Yeah, there you go. Okay, carry on, Thomas.
No, I think it's important to talk about actually the headline that's in there as well. But what I'll transition from what Bidisha is saying about Keir Starmer there to say that this is a problem facing Liz Truss and the Conservative government, largely of their own making. It wasn't Labour backbenchers or frontbenchers that pushed them into this position. It wasn't really even Conservative backbenchers. It was the markets, and that's very much the problem that Liz Truss has faced, totally underestimating the reaction that the markets would have, and it's forced her into the position that this headline in the Sunday Telegraph is alluding to. Hunt delays the 1p tax cut as bank backs Chancellor. We've already seen a U-turn on that 45% rate for top earners, a U-turn on the corporation tax rate for businesses, and then pushing this 1% cut to the basic rate back to essentially where it was going to be prior under the previous policy from Rishi Sunak. And with all of those politics gone, and Hunt talking today about actually, raising taxes, cutting spending, he talks about inefficiencies. What you're starting to see is policies emerging from the government that don't really resemble those that Liz Truss ran in her leadership campaign. And that obviously begs the question, well, what is the point of that leadership? And what does that leadership look like? Is it bringing new policies to the table? It might be the case that Conservative MPs are probably just happy to quieten down and try to let the winter go and see themselves through until next spring for a reassessment. But when you have the kind of cost of living crisis that's gripping households across the country, it becomes increasingly untenable to suggest that the government can really not do anything. It needs to have policies in place, and those need to come from a position of some sort of an ideology. And when you've got this toss-up within number 10 and number 11 between Liz Truss, who's now so weak, and Hunt, who represents a relatively different form of leadership than that which Liz Truss ran on, it's difficult to see how you will see a synthesis there that can unite the party.
Okay, let's look at the mirror, and in terms of who could possibly replace Truss, if that does happen. Ben Wallace, Batisha, what do you think? Are they just grabbing at any names, or are they just looking at who's left?
Well, I like this idea of grabbing at names because at some point this is going to be like a game of musical chairs where there are more empty chairs than potential players. Ben Wallace is the Defence Secretary who's garnered some respect, I think, amongst the public as well as amongst his colleagues for the response to Ukraine. Not that Britain's response to the invasion of Ukraine has much power or force behind it, but he is one of the people being mooted in the new leadership race because he will be going up against Rishi Sunak, who has now been pulled back into the fray, even though my secret theory was that some gigantic American tech company would just snap him up immediately. Now, Ben Wallace was part of the initial leadership race right at the beginning back in July, and he stepped back to, in that classic politician's phrase, spend more time with his family. Well, he clearly has had enough time spent with his family and is considering coming back into the round. And we've also heard that Penny Mordaunt has been going around trying to harvest a little bit of support. So this is going to be Christmas 2022, which is a rerun of High Summer 2022, as lots of familiar names come right back into the mix. They're clearly circling the wagons around Liz Truss, and Thomas is exactly right about that her days are clearly numbered.
What about what the Observer is saying, Thomas? They're saying they're in talks to oust Truss, but you reckon that they're going to keep her on there simply because the party can't manage another Prime Minister?
Well, I think the challenge that the Conservatives have at the moment is that if they remove Liz Truss from office and they need to put a replacement in, that replacement probably could not last tenably in office for 2 years until when the next general election is meant to happen. And that means you need a new general election. And that essentially leaves Conservative MPs facing a choice, which is, do we try to go into a new election now? That is to say, we trigger a general election, or we do nothing. Okay. Or do we install a PM in place and then have to have a general election?
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Yeah, Thomas, we'll pick it up next hour. Batisha Thomas, thanks a lot. We'll see you in an hour. Still to come on Sky News Breakfast, all about the new Chancellor. He's heading to Chequers today for talks with Liz Truss. Back in a moment.